If a narcissist suddenly became colder, more passive-aggressive, or more disrespectful after you became stronger, this video will explain exactly why. Suddenly they become colder, more passive-aggressive, more critical, more distant. And if you have ever experienced someone changing completely after you became calmer, stronger, harder to manipulate, this video is going to explain exactly why. Because the truth is darker than most people realize. Narcissists do not hate emotionally strong people because they are confident. They hate them because emotionally strong people are difficult to control, difficult to guilt, difficult to emotionally confuse, difficult to break down psychologically. And once you truly understand this, you stop looking at narcissists the same way forever. You stop seeing difficult people. You start seeing emotional control patterns. At first, narcissists often seem deeply interested in you. That is the part most people misunderstand. They text first, compliment you constantly, study you carefully, make you feel seen, special, important. And honestly, for a while, it feels real. But then something shifts. The moment you stop chasing their approval emotionally, the warmth slowly disappears. Suddenly, they become colder, shorter, passive-aggressive. You start noticing little comments, subtle disrespect, emotional distance. And you keep asking yourself, what happened? Here is what happened. The narcissist realized they could not control you the way they expected. That changes everything. Because narcissists do not build relationships the way emotionally healthy people do. Healthy people seek connection. Narcissists often seek emotional leverage. Read that again carefully. Healthy people seek connection. Narcissists seek leverage. Leverage through attention, leverage through guilt, leverage through emotional dependency, leverage through insecurity. That is why narcissists are often drawn toward empathetic people in the beginning. Empathetic people are emotionally open, patient, forgiving, understanding. They give people chances. They tolerate behavior emotionally strong people would reject immediately. Narcissists love that energy. Because emotionally caring people are easier to emotionally shape and influence over time. And the scary part is, most narcissistic control does not happen aggressively at first. It happens psychologically, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. At first, they learn your emotional weak points. What makes you insecure? What makes you feel guilty? What makes you fear abandonment? What makes you chase approval? And then they slowly build emotional control around those weaknesses. That is why narcissistic relationships often feel confusing. One day they admire you, the next day they criticize you. One moment they make you feel important, the next moment they make you feel invisible. One moment they pull you close emotionally, the next moment they withdraw completely. That inconsistency is not random, it is psychological. Because emotional inconsistency creates emotional dependency. When somebody constantly changes emotional temperature, your brain starts chasing stability, clarity, validation, approval, and narcissists gain emotional power inside that chase. But emotionally strong people eventually stop chasing. That is what narcissists hate most. Emotionally strong people pause, observe, think. Detach emotionally from manipulation patterns. They stop begging for clarity. They stop panicking over emotional withdrawal. They stop over-explaining themselves constantly. And suddenly, the narcissist loses emotional leverage. That is where the real conflict begins. Because narcissists survive through emotional leverage. Read that again. Narcissists survive through emotional leverage. That is why narcissists often become angry when emotionally strong people create boundaries. Healthy people respect boundaries. Narcissists often experience boundaries as loss of control. That is why the moment you say no, everything changes emotionally. The moment you stop reacting to guilt trips, they become frustrated. The moment you stop chasing after silent treatments, they become colder. The moment you stop tolerating disrespect, they accuse you of changing. That reaction reveals everything. Because narcissists often mistake loss of control for betrayal, And once you realize that, you begin seeing your past relationships differently. Suddenly you understand why certain people only loved you when you were emotionally available to manipulation, when you tolerated disrespect silently, when you constantly needed approval, when you kept abandoning yourself emotionally just to maintain peace. But emotionally strong people eventually stop doing that, and narcissists feel that shift immediately. Because emotionally strong people are difficult to destabilize psychologically. They do not emotionally collapse every time attention disappears. They do not panic every time somebody becomes cold. They do not surrender boundaries every time guilt appears. That emotional stability feels threatening to narcissists. Why? Because emotional stability removes emotional control. And narcissists need emotional control to feel psychologically secure internally. That is the hidden truth most people never understand about narcissists. Underneath the ego, underneath the arrogance, underneath the superiority, there is often deep emotional insecurity, fragile self-worth, fragile identity, fragile emotional stability. That is why narcissists constantly seek external validation, attention, admiration, reactions, control, because internally, their self-worth depends heavily on outside emotional feedback. And emotionally strong people interrupt that system naturally, not because they are cruel, not because they are cold, but because emotionally strong people validate themselves internally. That changes everything. People who validate themselves internally become much harder to manipulate emotionally. Why? Because manipulation depends heavily on self-doubt. Narcissists need you questioning yourself, questioning your value, questioning your instincts, questioning your emotional reality. That is why narcissists often use gaslighting, emotional withdrawal, comparison, criticism, passive aggression, guilt, silent treatment, all designed to weaken emotional stability slowly over time. Because emotionally insecure people are easier to control. That is one of the darkest truths about narcissistic behavior. Narcissists often feel safest around emotionally weaker versions of people. People who tolerate disrespect. People who fear abandonment deeply. People who constantly seek validation. People who over-explain themselves emotionally. But emotionally strong people eventually stop participating in those patterns. And that is when narcissists often become most hostile. Because narcissists do not fear strong people physically. They fear people who no longer need their approval emotionally. That realization changes the way you see people forever. Because now you stop confusing emotional intensity with love. You stop confusing obsession with care. You stop confusing emotional chaos with passion. That is not love. That is control. And honestly, once you see it clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. Suddenly, certain moments from your past make sense. The passive-aggressive comments after you gained confidence, the emotional withdrawal after you created boundaries, the criticism after you stopped chasing approval, the guilt trips after you protected your peace. You begin realizing the narcissist was never angry because you were weak. They became angry when your weakness stopped working on you. That changes everything, because now you stop personalizing narcissistic behavior. You stop thinking, if I explain myself better, maybe they'll understand. You stop trying to win back the version of them that only existed when you were easier to control. And that realization is painful. Because many people eventually discover that the best version of the narcissist only appeared when emotional control was working successfully. That is why emotionally strong people eventually become emotionally exhausting for narcissists. Calm people are difficult to manipulate. Emotionally grounded people are difficult to provoke. Self-respecting people are difficult to emotionally dominate. And narcissists feel powerless around people they cannot emotionally destabilize. That is why narcissists often test emotionally strong people repeatedly. Subtle disrespect, emotional games, passive aggression, attempts to provoke reactions. They are unconsciously asking, can I still affect you emotionally? And when emotionally strong people remain calm, the narcissist often becomes even more frustrated. Because now they feel emotionally powerless. That is the part most people never understand. Narcissists fear powerlessness deeply. That fear drives almost everything. the manipulation, the control, the emotional games, the constant need for validation. It all comes from fear underneath. Fear of losing emotional control. Fear of emotional irrelevance. Fear of not being admired. Fear of not being needed. And emotionally strong people trigger those fears naturally. Because emotionally strong people eventually stop needing emotional permission to protect their peace. Read that again carefully. Emotionally strong people stop needing emotional permission to protect their peace. That is what narcissists hate most. Not confidence, not strength. Freedom. The freedom to walk away from manipulation. The freedom to say no without guilt. The freedom to stop explaining yourself constantly. The freedom to stop chasing emotionally unavailable people. And once somebody reaches that level emotionally, narcissistic control starts collapsing. That is why emotionally strong people often lose narcissistic relationships completely. Not because they became cruel, but because manipulation stopped working. And manipulative relationships cannot survive once emotional control disappears. One day you stop trying to explain yourself to the narcissist. You stop trying to prove your worth. You stop trying to earn basic respect. You stop trying to save somebody committed to emotional control. And that is the exact moment the manipulation finally loses power over you. That is why narcissists hate emotionally strong people. Because emotionally strong people eventually stop abandoning themselves emotionally just to keep toxic people comfortable. And once that happens, the narcissist can no longer control the relationship the way they used to. Now you finally understand why everything changed the moment they realized they could no longer control you emotionally.